In a valley in northern Italy, a massive dam stood behind narrow rock walls. After World War II, as a symbol of industrial development, northern Italy had a great need for electricity. For this reason, the government constructed a gigantic dam, which was not only an architectural feat but also a masterpiece of its time. However, mistakes made during its construction and negligent oversight led to a catastrophic disaster, claiming the lives of thousands of people living downstream. This was the Vajont Dam disaster of 1963. The story unfolds in 20th century Italy, during the nation's economic recovery following World War II. Faced with a shortage of coal, a critical resource for thermal power generation, electricity companies began seeking alternative methods of power production. They identified the Valle del Vajont Canyon as one of the deepest natural gorges in the world, flanked by towering, interconnected mountain ridges. The terrain in this area was highly suitable for building a dam to store water. In 1927, the Italian Parliament approved the construction of the Vajont Dam, but it wasn't until 1957 that the project was initiated thanks to financial aid from the Marshall Plan, an economic assistance program from the United States for Western Europe. It took over 30 years from planning to the start of construction. SAID, one of Italy's largest electricity companies, undertook the construction of the dam. The dam was situated on Mount Toc in northern Italy, within the Valle del Vajont. In this valley flowed a stream called Vajont, a tributary of the Piave River downstream. The dam was designed to block the Vajont stream's flow, creating a natural reservoir within the Valle del Vajont. Across Italy, the construction of the dam was widely regarded as a symbol of technological prowess and social progress. However, the locals in the towns scattered beneath the dam were far from enthusiastic. They pointed out that the mountain to the right of the dam, known as Monte Toc, which translates to walking mountain, had a history of landslides. They had frequently witnessed this phenomenon during their time living there. Moreover, geologists who had studied the area for decades had noted that part of the canyon was naturally formed by a massive landslide thousands of years ago. Even the natural dams in the region were constantly altered by landslides and erosion. Despite these objections and the overwhelming evidence, construction of the dam went ahead. The Italian government had granted SAID, one of the country's largest power companies, a monopoly on electricity. Consequently, in 1957, when construction began, no one had the authority to stop them. In 1961, this colossal project was completed. The Vajont Dam took 4 years to construct. The construction works included the dam structure itself, spillways, diversion tunnels, an underground power plant, shelters, and many other facilities. It was an arch dam, designed to curve in both horizontal and vertical directions, allowing it to withstand immense loads. The dam's crest was 190 meters long and 3.35 meters wide, while the base measured 32 meters in length and 22 meters in width. Its reservoir had a capacity of 168 million cubic meters. The crest featured 16 gates, along with an underground power plant, and 3 outlet gates at the base. At the time, it was the tallest arch dam in the world. Carlo Semenza, the designer of the Vajont Dam, was renowned as one of the most distinguished dam designers and builders of his era. The Vajont Dam was his final project before retiring. Omens of disaster. Warning 1. Immediately after construction began, major issues continuously plagued the Vajont Dam. In 1959, engineers discovered that the dam's construction had triggered minor landslides and seismic tremors throughout the valley. Recognizing the danger, the dam management proposed a solution: building a new drainage channel in the Monte Toc Valley to improve the reservoir's drainage capacity during critical moments. This would allow water from the reservoir to be quickly diverted to other locations in case of further landslides. Warning 2. By mid-1960, nearby municipalities, including Erto and Casso, reported experiencing earthquakes measuring 5.0 on the Richter scale. These tremors were strong enough to topple objects, shatter dishes, and move furniture within homes. However, when journalists began reporting on these incidents, local authorities sued them for disrupting public order. Officials claimed the journalists lacked documented records of the earthquakes or concrete evidence to support their allegations. Rather than addressing the problem, the government opted to suppress it. Warning 3. On August 22, 1960, a disaster occurred. Not at the Vajont Dam, but at the Pontassé Dam, located 20 kilometers northwest of Vajont. That afternoon, a sudden landslide struck the reservoir. Nearly 3 million cubic meters of soil and gravel plunged into the lake. Within less than 3 minutes, the Pontassé reservoir was overwhelmed. Water overflowed the dam and rushed downstream. At the time, a worker was conducting repairs on the Pontassé Dam. Tragically, he was swept away by the floodwaters, and his body was discovered 3 days later after an extensive search. This landslide accident happened while the Vajont Dam was still under construction, and the Pontassé Dam bore striking similarities to it. The incident raised serious questions about the safety of the Vajont Dam, especially among residents of towns downstream. Warning 4. On September 3, 1961, a resident of the Vajont Valley went up Monty Toc to cut wood and discovered cracks along a newly paved road on the mountainside. After noticing the fissures and signs of movement, he reported the findings to geologists. Following their research and assessment, the geologists submitted their report to the dam management experts. The experts stated that the eastern slope of Monty Toc was extremely unstable and prone to landslides. However, the dam management dismissed these concerns, claiming they had thoroughly studied the valley and its geological conditions. They argued that the rock formations on both sides of the valley were solid, and there were no significant geological hazards. Moreover, they believed that the asymmetrical tilt of the dam structure would prevent any slope movement. In their view, the mountain remained stable, and the likelihood of a landslide was low. Despite the concerns, SAID began filling the empty reservoir in early 1962. By October of that year, the water level had reached nearly 170 meters, significantly increasing the pressure on the surrounding mountains. At this point, cracks began to form on the mountain slopes on both sides of the reservoir. One of these cracks extended as far as 1.9 kilometers. In November, just a month after the first cracks appeared, technicians raised the reservoir's water level to 250 meters. The surrounding mountains could no longer withstand the tension caused by the water. Approximately 1 million cubic meters of rock from the surrounding slopes slid into the reservoir. Although these landslides were relatively minor, they served as a clear warning sign, prompting technicians to quickly lower the water level to 200 meters. Following these incidents, further geological studies revealed that the mountain adjacent to the dam was inherently unstable. However, the engineers believed that by keeping the water level below the maximum of 250 meters, they could still avert disaster. With careful research and ongoing risk monitoring, they were confident that all issues could be managed. Just a few months after the initial landslide, SAID raised the dam's water level to 252 meters. The surrounding mountain slopes began to react, shifting at a rate of up to 3.5 centimeters per day. By 1963, the reservoir was filled to capacity, and the southern slope of Monty Toc was moving as much as 1 meter per day. On October 9, 1963, engineers began noticing trees and rocks falling in the area, destroyed by a landslide. However, based on the simulations they had conducted, the engineers believed that the landslide would only produce a small wave within the reservoir. 3 kilometers west of the Vajont Dam was a town called Longueron, located directly between the dam and the river junction. 2 rivers, the Piave and the Boit, ran through the town, flowing very close to one another. Some people considered the construction of a dam in the valley extremely dangerous. Residents of Longueron feared that if the dam were to break, massive torrents of water would sweep everything away. In response, they constructed floodwalls and spillways to guard against unforeseen disasters. But as often is the case, the more we worry about something, the more likely it seems to come true. The disaster strikes. On the evening of October 9, 1963, rain fell over the Vajont Valley. Families were gathered around their televisions, engrossed in the European football final. As people were preparing for bed, at precisely 10:39 p.m., a violent earthquake struck. A massive section of Monty Toc, measuring 270 million cubic meters, broke loose and slid down the mountain at an astonishing speed of 109 kilometers per hour. As the enormous mass crashed into the reservoir, it emitted a deafening roar. Within less than 45 seconds, the impact created a colossal wave. Approximately 50 million cubic meters of water surged upwards, resembling a monstrous tsunami. The water overflowed the Vajont Dam and poured into the valley below, cascading downstream with devastating force. The earthquake's effects caused a power outage, plunging the entire valley into darkness. The ferocious floodwaters rushed into the Piave River, destroying the floodwalls built by the residents. Entire houses were swept away, leaving the town in utter ruin. The devastating flash flood leveled the valley to the ground. In the darkness, apart from the torrential sound of the raging waters, the air was filled with the cries of people and the distressed calls of livestock. The disaster struck so suddenly that the residents had little to no time to prepare. Many lost their lives in their sleep, unaware of the catastrophe. When the floodwaters receded, the town was left utterly flattened. All 372 buildings in the town were swept away, and the 22 structures that remained were completely destroyed by the deluge. The area was reduced to a vast field of rubble. Villages downstream from Longarone suffered varying degrees of devastation, leaving behind a trail of unimaginable destruction. The disaster claimed the lives of more than 2,000 people, leaving 350 families bereaved and over 1,600 injured. The entire town was heavily impacted, with the floodwaters wiping out 1/3 of the town's population. Upon receiving reports of the calamity, the first rescue team arrived in Longarone at 3:30 a.m. They were highly trained military personnel. By 5 a.m., 850 rescue workers from 46 different regions rushed to the scene to assist with the rescue efforts. Among them were 8 brave divers who risked their lives by diving into the waters. Their mission was to locate highly toxic chemical containers stored at the bottom of the Vajont Dam's reservoir in the power plant. They managed to retrieve 61 plastic barrels, successfully averting a potential chemical disaster. Rescue workers tirelessly dug through the mud and rubble, desperately searching for survivors. In the end, 73 people were rescued. They recovered the bodies of over 1,000 victims from the mud, while many others remained missing, their bodies never found, the mud becoming their final resting place. It is also likely that some were crushed under the sheer force of the shock wave. When the landslide struck, the Vajont Dam staff were at work inside the facility. Due to the sudden surge in water levels, they were engulfed by the floodwaters. Among them were 20 engineers working in the control center on the dam's western side and 40 employees in the office building on the eastern side. Tragically, all of them perished. When the massive landslide hit the reservoir, it created an enormous wave that surged upstream, destroying infrastructure, buildings, and claiming the lives of 158 people. The floodwaters then rushed over the dam and transformed the town of Longarone into a swamp. Although the flood's force had weakened by this point, it did not stop. It continued its destructive path further south, devastating more villages along the way before finally subsiding. 2 months after the disaster, a parliamentary investigative committee was established to determine the causes of this catastrophic event. Amid the desolation, 2 opposing views emerged in Italy. Some argued that responsibility for the disaster rested squarely on the dam management and the relevant government agencies. They contended that the construction of the reservoir and dam had altered the structure of Monte Toc, triggering the vibrations that ultimately caused the catastrophic landslide. The dam managers ignored the risks, continuing to fill the reservoir to dangerously high levels. Prior to the disaster, there had been numerous warning signs, but the involved government authorities turned a blind eye and failed to recognize the impending danger. Others argued that the dam management was not at fault. Even after the disaster, the dam itself remained structurally sound, showing no signs of damage. Despite being subjected to such an immense flood, the dam's structure was entirely intact, indicating no quality issues. According to this perspective, the disaster was likely caused by a natural calamity. In reality, however, several unusual signs had emerged before the catastrophe. Renowned Austrian geologist Professor Leopold Müller had warned that constructing a reservoir beneath Monte Toc could trigger massive landslides. Nevertheless, the project continued because post-war Italy was thirsty for electricity during the Reconstruction years. The Italian government saw hydroelectric power plants as a viable solution to the shortage of fossil fuels. 3 years before the disaster, a minor earthquake struck the northern slopes of Monte Toc. Media outlets reported on the incident, and experts pointed out that the Monte Toc range was at risk of landslides. As the media coverage grew, more people became aware of the issue, causing panic among nearby residents. Some complained to the authorities, but their efforts were unsuccessful. Engineer Mario Pancini, who had relocated with his family since the dam's construction began, lived in the town of Longarone as the resident engineer on the construction site. He was responsible for overseeing the dam's construction and was well aware of the tremors that had occurred at Montauk. Pancini understood the potential dangers and drafted a report outlining mitigation measures. This report was submitted to the chief engineer as a reminder of the significant impact that a landslide could have. Following a minor landslide incident, the dam management constructed a hydraulic model to study the reservoir and dam's resilience in the event of a landslide. The model was established to simulate potential scenarios. The dam management funded the project, with Professors Getty and Marzolo from the University of Padua jointly responsible for evaluating the dam's safety. Both were experts in water conservation. They conducted simulations of landslides and other phenomena to assess the dam's stability. The experiments were divided into two groups, using different materials to model the landslide scenarios. The final conclusion was that, in the event of a landslide, the dam itself would not pose a threat to the downstream area. However, this depended on the water level and the speed of the landslide. They asserted that as long as the reservoir's water level was kept below a specific threshold, the downstream impact could be considered negligible. Despite these findings, 5 minor earthquakes occurred in the Montauk Valley, where the dam was constructed. However, the dam management chose to dismiss the risks associated with these seismic events. A year before the disaster, engineers reported to the dam management about the potential danger posed by a Montauk landslide to the reservoir's safety. Their experiments showed that if the reservoir's water level exceeded the maximum capacity by 20 meters, the water would overflow the dam crest, leading to catastrophic consequences. They recommended increasing the dam's original height by an additional 61 meters, but this proposal was rejected. Meanwhile, earthquakes continued to occur frequently. 24 days before the disaster, a landslide took place on the northern slope of Montauk. The road along the reservoir's edge was severely deformed. The newly appointed chief engineer, Biadny, recommended shutting down the reservoir due to the escalating risk. However, the management refused to take this step and only allowed the water level to be partially lowered. After the disaster, the dam management and several government officials attributed the cause to an unavoidable natural calamity. However, the Italian public condemned the dam management for their irresponsible actions. At the time, Italian Prime Minister Giovanni Leone called for a thorough investigation into the causes of the disaster and promised justice for those who had lost their lives. Every human failure carries a cost. The case was brought to trial at the court in L'Aquila, where 11 defendants faced charges. During the proceedings, 2 of the accused passed away, and engineer Mario Pancini tragically took his own life the night before the preliminary hearing. Pancini could not bear the pressure of guilt and regret. He had been deeply concerned about the dam's safety before the disaster, but ultimately failed to prevent it. After 7.5 years of judicial proceedings through multiple levels of court, the final ruling in March 1971 convicted engineer Francesco Censidoni, head of the dam division at the Ministry of Public Works, and engineer Alberico Biadini of Sadie. The other defendants were acquitted. Censidoni and Biadini were found guilty of grossly inaccurate forecasting that led to the devastating flood and manslaughter by negligence. Both pleaded guilty. Censidoni was sentenced to 3 years and 8 months in prison, but 3 years of his sentence were commuted on health grounds. In reality, Censidoni never served a single day in prison. Biadini was sentenced to 5 years in prison, but was granted a 3-year commutation, also on health grounds. He served only 1 year before being released for good behavior. After the disaster, the town of Longarone and surrounding villages began reconstruction projects. The government implemented support packages to drive the development of northeastern Italy. Survivors of the disaster were eligible for tax-free public subsidies for 10 years and interest-free business loans. Now, 60 years after the disaster, the Vajont Dam still stands in the Montauk Valley. Following the tragedy, it has become a tourist landmark, attracting visitors from all over. Thank you for watching the video. What are your thoughts on this disaster? Let us know in the comments below.